You are listening to the Star Lores Podcast.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Are you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder?
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, one of the building blocks of life outside of the Force. All biological, living creatures are built using the nanoscopic material and blueprints laid out in the signature of their unique species that make them what and who they are. From the lowliest Kowakian monkey lizard to the Duingoin star dragons, the very essence of life is written in these organic signatures. But what if technology were developed to harness the very power of life, to shape it, sell it, and manipulate it with intent? Biological engineering has been a practice used by many species throughout galactic history. It has been used as a tool for survival, a method to create profit, or as a means to enhance quality of life. It has also been weaponized, used to control and to enslave. It can be as simple as breeding livestock and plants for higher yields, or desired traits on the plains of Naboo, to the complicated microscopic work of cellular engineering and replication in the sterile halls of Camino.
Genetic engineering. Genetic engineering is a useful form of biotechnology that can be used to modify existing living cells to achieve a desired outcome. Selective breeding is the simplest method of genetic engineering, often used by less advanced species to produce better crops and desired traits in their livestock. In some cases, breeding programs were used by sentient species for similar effect. The insectoid Geonosians were known for their naturally evolved hive-like social structure, with its own somewhat biologically derived strata, castes being born and sorted via their physical attributes such as wings, etc. However, a lesser-known fact was that Geonosians further modified by way of engineering and selective breeding to reinforce the traits of their drone classes, leading to subcastes including farmers, makers, general labor, service, and warrior subtypes, among others. The Sith were notorious for the eugenics programs, resulting in the caste system and hierarchical social structure favoring, quote, full bloods, but also resulting in numerous Sith subspecies with varying traits. The creation of the Massassi warriors was in part due to a breeding program, but also thanks to dark Sith alchemy used to pervert the species' genetics to create hulking brutes to serve as slaves to future Dark Lords. The Nemodian species, not typically known to undertake frontline combat duties, preferring others to fight for them, did maintain a small soldiery force. Some of these soldiers were drafted into a secret experiment known as the Brute Program, often against their will. These genetically engineered soldiers were heavily muscled, tall, and prone to violent outbursts. They were often held in stasis to be unleashed in the most dire circumstances, and often to be deadly warriors. The Republic Livestock and Agricultural Administration had increased various animal and crop yields through a mixture of both traditional breeding and artificial genetic manipulation, to help feed the ever-growing galactic population. Private corporations such as GeneSculpt and Theragene had also made lucrative ventures into microtechnology and gene therapy. The Arcanian Dominion, KP's Consortium, and Chiss Ascendancy have all engaged in genetic tampering. Anything from breeding programs to the development of variants and subspecies. While best known for their work as cloners and producing such marvels as the Grand Army of the Republic, Kaminoans had first mastered their genetic manipulation and craft on themselves, thus giving them the expertise they would later capitalize on. When their homeworld was struck by disastrous flooding, the species was pushed to the brink of extinction. It was here that they used the tools of genetic engineering, cloning, and selective breeding to bring their species back from the precipice of annihilation. Their work had left them as brutal utilitarians and intolerant perfectionists, cheapening their views on life as mere products, objects, and subjects. Kaminoans were quick to euthanize those that did not meet their high standards and eradicate whatever they deemed as imperfections without remorse. Despite their cruelty, their ability to produce high-quality clones and tailor genes to suit whatever purpose they desired was second almost to none. Cloning technology.
Cloning was a practice that has had a wide range of applications. From the replication of lesser copies to fulfill undesirable tasks, to some of the most elite and indispensable combat personnel in the galaxy, and even to produce vessels to extend mortal existence. Cloning technology was as useful as the skill of those who produced the clones can make it. The Grand Army of the Republic is perhaps the greatest testament to the capabilities of cloning technology at a vast scale. The army of millions was able to challenge the Confederacy of Independent Systems with a droid army that numbered in the quintillions, along with their biological military components. Made from the genetic material of the Mandalorian bounty hunter Jango Fett, bred for combat since childhood, trained by the most deadly warriors, and altered to make them soldiers through and through. This was not without its costs, however, both in time, credits, and even morality. Despite their accelerated growth, their production was still measured in years. Each clone was an investment of time, training, and credits, costing the Republic a fortune. Further, despite the stance of the Republic fighting for liberty, it used an army of individuals whose liberty was curtailed and sold as a product to fight and die for those same alleged values. A much less reliable form of cloning was the automated Sparty cloning system. This method used a cylinder to flash produce a clone in a much shorter amount of time than had personalities uploaded or otherwise flash pumped into the clone's brains. While grown much quicker, results are not as good as clones grown with more technique and trained from birth to learn and gain experiences naturally. Growing a clone too quickly ran the risk of developing clone madness, an acute form of psychosis. During the end of the Clone Wars, the Republic began augmenting their clones with the Sparty cloned variants, at the behest of Emperor Palpatine, who had ulterior motives for these non-Kaminoan variants. The Empire would also augment its Stormtrooper Corps with vat-grown clones, though clone madness and lower quality results led the Empire to move towards traditional recruitment. Clones were also used for personal purposes. If one was wealthy enough to purchase one and could be used for menial labor or as body doubles for the eccentric upper classes to attend events or reduce threats to their purpose. though handmaids and close approximations could also serve similar purposes for a fraction of the cost, though the practice was broadly frowned upon and highly regulated by the Empire. One noted limitation of cloning technology was its interaction with Force users, which never resulted in reliable outcomes and often ended with catastrophic results. It was the cause and the bane of many a genetic scientist to solve the riddle of the Force, and often lent itself to radical and torturous experimentation. The Empire had been successful in at least a small number of experiments, such as the cloning of Darth Vader's secret apprentice, Galen Marek, as well as the clones of Jairus Kabath, Luke Skywalker, and Sheev Palpatine himself. Some species were wholly dependent on cloning, such as the Kham, who, believed to have reached the pinnacle of civilization, froze all progress and development, choosing to make their entire population static. In order to maintain the continued conformity and lack of evolution, the Kham relied on cloning to reproduce, so that, after a time, all currently living Kham were clones of past generations.
Biomancy. Aside from their scientific forms of genetic manipulation, the Sith also practice a form of biomancy that encompassed everything from altering already living things, such as the fearsome Terran Tatic, to manipulating midichlorians to produce life itself, as the case with Anakin Skywalker. Sith also manipulated poisons to enhance their effects or precisely target individuals. They could also use the Force to drain the life energy of others and enhance their own physical attributes, though the Jedi have been known to use similar Force techniques to influence biology, though usually more temporarily. Other Force users, along with the Sith, used methods more akin to witchcraft than science to achieve their desired results. Savage Opress, a Zabrak from Dathomir, and brother of the fearsome Sith warrior Darth Maul, had been chosen by the Night Sisters to undergo a ritual that enhanced his physical capabilities and cloud his mind, turning the warrior into a hulking mass of muscle, extending his natural horns and giving him unnatural resilience. The Night Sisters also employed similar Force techniques to reanimate the decaying flesh of their sisters to serve as mindless zombies. Biotechnology.
Perhaps the greatest example of mastery over biological engineering are the Yuuzhan Vong. Spawned from the living sentient planet Yuzlan-Tar, and reaching out to galaxies outside of their own, the Yuuzhan Vong despised inorganic technology. Their faith prohibited its use, and so the species had to engineer everything they used, from the living symbiotic suits of armor to their interstellar spacecraft, to the Vong themselves. All biological material was grown and shaped to fulfill its purpose. Of course, the Vong would disavow the use of the world technology for its implications, derived from the rabid technophobia, preferring the word biot in reference to their organic material. Their methods proved formidable, bringing the galaxy to its knees. They had the ability to terraform whole planets and their spacecraft, from the massive Korostrona world ships to the small fighter Coral Skipper, would have been grown from biological matter. Their factories would grow their weapons, armor, and warcraft rather than manufacture them, and like all living things, had to be fed and would eventually age and die. Yorick coral was the staple material for the larger spacecraft and could be found growing on worlds previously invaded by the Vong, such as deep in the undercity of Coruscant. It is unclear whether some species utilize biotechnology, however. The Mon Calamari are known to use technology that, at the very least, resembles organic matter, but it is unclear if it's simply the product of replicating the functionality observed in the natural world, or if it is in fact the result of using biological compounds in their work. Similarly, the aquatic species of Quarren who shared the Mon Cala homeworld used similar designs. The organic gill, however, was a Mon Cala invention, a symbiotic life form that sentients could use to help them to breathe underwater. The symbiotes also allowed other components to be installed into them, such as comlinks and other gadgets. Because of the organic nature of those devices, they only had lifespans of about a month before they perished and had to be replaced. Another amphibious species, the Gungans, were known to use a mysterious blue goo as a basis for energy and technology that was mined, though it is unclear if there is a biological component to this viscous substance. There were other species who also used biotechnology as well. However, it is often overshadowed by the galaxy's inorganic options, filling niche roles, and weren't always widely adopted. That isn't to say that some such technology did not find wider use, such as items like the gill. One biotechnology that had proved universal and invaluable was Bacta. This cure-all medicine was derived from bacterial particles suspended in a fluid known as ambori.
Bioweapons. Since before the time of the Old Republic, biological weapons have been a staple of galactic conflict. Weaponized disease had been used by many groups across many conflicts. One notable extragalactic civilization was known for causing its own extinction by way of a plague bomb. The last known vessel, a mechno-organic sentient ship, and its xenopilot were the only survivors of the weapon that had wiped out their civilization. Dragon's Breath, Hex, or Trihexalon, was a caustic bioweapon of mass destruction that rendered all biomatter down to simple biomass. It could be unleashed on whole populations or key to specific and individual DNA. The deadly substance was banned by the Republic, though it would later be used by Imperial scientists as a disinfectant in case of lab accidents or escapes that required the ultimate level of sanitation. During the Clone Wars, the Separatist forces attempted to weaponize the Blue Shadow virus and Leodorvian brain plague to destroy their adversaries. The Grand Army of the Republic was a cloned and engineered force of highly specialized, deadly, and resilient soldiers, and could very well be classed as biological weapons in their own right. The Galactic Empire was notorious for its many military development programs and paid no heed to the expense of the development of its bioweapon arsenal. From engineering plagues to other experimentations, the Empire sought to weaponize everything. The Empire even devoted a whole corps to the Imperial Corps of bioengineers, even while banning and highly restricting the practice for the wider galaxy after the Clone Wars. Nanodestroyers were a class of artificial viruses that were key to specific individuals' genetic codes, perfect for assassinations with undetectable delivery and minimizing collateral damage. The cliff wampas were the result of genetic experimentation of the ruthless wampa predator that stalked the ice fields of Hoth. These variants were adapted to surviving on the edges of cliffs and served the Empire as guard pets to dissuade prying rebel eyes. They resemble their natural counterparts, save for the brown fur rather than the typical white that served as camouflage on their native world. During the rise of the Diversity Alliance, a humanophobic group of aliens had found an old Imperial weapon, the Emperor's Plague, which would have been used to exterminate all humanity had they not been stopped by the Jedi of the New Republic. Both the Republic and Yuuzhan Vong deployed bioweapons against each other, targeting the unique genetics of each other's species, as well as the flora and fauna of their worlds. Many years later, during the Sith rule of the One Sith, Darth Maladai, an toxicology expert and scientist, was able to weaponize a Yuuzhan Vong virus to destroy the terraforming efforts on formerly Vong-conquered worlds. The same Sith forces and Maladai herself would be implicated in other bioweapons, including the hyper-lethal Omega Red pathogen derived from Alpha Red, which itself was refined from Bafor tree pollen, which had been used against the Yuuzhan Vong, and whose Sith-inspired variant was used to threaten Coruscant itself in the future. Bioweapons have broad use as pathogens, having been used routinely for genocide while keeping infrastructure intact, or can be used so subtly that they are locked to an individual's genetic code, used to eliminate them covertly and discreetly. Thanks for flying with us. Jordan here. Just wanted to let everyone know what's happening here at the Star Lords podcast. Star Lords is now on Discord. If you would like to join the Star Lords Cantina Discord server, you can find a link in the description or on any of our social media accounts. Reach out with a DM or email. We'd love to hear from you. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter by searching the Star Lords podcast. Go ahead and give our page a like and send us a message. You can also email at starlordspodcast@gmail.com. Send us your fan art, Star Wars collections, or fan fictions, and you may even get a feature on one of our pages or even the show. Don't be afraid to offer corrections or add to any of the topics that we discuss on the show. We are also on Patreon, so if you want to help us pay the bills, as well as get a few awesome perks like bonus episodes, access to the private Facebook group, or the VIP section of the Discord server, head on over to patreon.com/starlores and sign up for as little as $1 a month. And finally, make sure to subscribe to us on your favorite podcatcher app or YouTube, as well as sending us a 5-star review on iTunes. This really helps us reach a wider audience. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Everybody, welcome aboard the Millennial Falcon. This is Christian.
This is Jordan.
We are currently hovering over beautiful fields of backed up producing world.
Yeah. Not like a plague-ridden world.
No, this time
with nauseous gases.
We've come for healing and a safe retreat instead of the dangerous situations we always seem to find ourselves in.
Mm-hmm.
Today we're talking about biotechnology, which, interestingly enough, is a very big real-world interest of mine. I'm not by any means any kind of real life bioscientist or anything like that, but I do have a more than a passing interest, and I've read my fair share of random articles on current biotech, and
It's like a pretty crazy field.
fascinating and terrifying all at the same time.
And I feel like some of the bioweapons ideas that you covered in Star Wars were probably lifted from like real world
That's actually one
ideas.
thing I did. I was
conceptually anyway.
I was trying to figure out like what came first, the real life thing or like the sci-fi thing that someone made into real life.
I feel like the authors who wrote it probably.
Maybe.
I'm sure like hasn't bioweapon like a lot of these bioweapon ideas been like
in development. Yeah, but how,
since the 60s?
Sure, but were they public in the 60s?
I don't know.
Right.
It's hard to say.
Funnily enough, this is kind of off topic, but that's what we're known for. The whole Star Wars was actually inspired by a real life government program called Star Wars by California Republican, very famous.
McCarthy?
No, conservative circles. Actor Reagan. Yes, thank you. Reagan's Star Wars plan, which was to develop orbital satellites to turn them into weapons.
Yeah.
And they called it the Star Wars Project.
Oh, okay.
And that's where...
Was this Reagan was president in 82. Was this while he was president?
Yeah. Now I'm thinking maybe it was Nixon. I don't know. I'm not a huge American history buff.
Yeah, because Star Wars came out...
Now I gotta have to Google it.
The first movie came out in 77, so it was like 5 years before Reagan.
So they named the initiative after the movie. Yeah, sorry.
They were inspired by George Lucas.
Right. So which came first, the real life weapons or the fictional universe
true,
weapons?
yeah.
It's a chicken or egg question.
Were they making a Death Star too?
I'm sure if you look into the CIA's files, you'll find something. You always find
Gotta
something.
get those filthy commies somehow.
Blow up the whole planet.
Yeah.
They reduced the world's rate of
one
communism to
way to do
absolute
it.
zero. No. Okay, kind of back on topic again. Biotechnology. One thing I kind of want to get out of the way right away, cybernetics. Cybernetics are definitely classed as a form of biotechnology, but they're more the fusion of inorganic with organic material. For this episode, we kind of wanted to stick with the organic material theme, so purposefully omitted cybernetics, even though they do play a huge role in Star Wars, as we know, and cybernetics themselves could and may become a full episode. I think we did a whole episode on cybernetics already.
I can't remember.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
We even went over like all the different things that Vader has going on and Grievous. And,
Oh, yeah.
and you see it, like even the movies, people's limbs constantly get replaced with robotics. So yeah, just kind of wanted to get that out of the way. Cybernetics definitely can be classed as a form of biotechnology, but for the purposes of this conversation, we're just going to leave that on the table there. Although I will say now, I guess, I do find it odd. I would have thought they would have had some kind of program for growing back biological limbs, which we very much know isn't the case because so many people do use robotic pieces that they replace limbs with.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a cool sci-fi concept that's been played around with, like in Spider-Man is the most notable thing that comes to my forefront. The lizard, his whole, I forget the character.
Well, like Wolverine too can grow back limbs.
Yeah, that's true. But specifically like the lizard, because this plays into a Star Wars concept here in a second. Dr. Connors is trying to grow back his missing arm, which inspires his whole research that ends up turning him into the monster. Inspired by real world lizards that can regrow limbs like tails and things like that. And that regenerative ability is reflected in the Trandoshan.
Like salamanders do that, right?
Yeah. And there's other lizard species that can grow back certain things.
But not all lizards.
No.
Yeah.
No, it's not universal.
Yeah.
So don't mutilate your lizards. But anyways, the Trandoshan.
My Komodo dragon no longer has a tail.
The fact that you own a Komodo dragon is concerning.
I don't.
Not anymore. Not after what you did to it. You tried to cut it in half and grow it into 2 Komodo dragons. No, the Trandoshans.
It's like a zygote. It like starts splitting every time you split the cell.
No. But the Trandoshan species, who are Star Wars lizards, do grow back their limbs.
Yeah.
Obviously inspired by that same kind of theme. And I'm wondering if it's possible for them to do something in Star Wars where they like take that ability and try to replicate it in other species or splice that gene into other species through, genetic engineering.
Yeah.
So just a quick kind of side thought that I had while I was writing this episode was like limb growing back would be a pretty cool, not too crazy for Star Wars, but also very much something we clearly see isn't the case because people are using cybernetics.
Yeah.
And if it is the case, maybe there's like a pro-con thing going on where maybe you grow back a lizard limb instead of your normal hand, so maybe you're better off with a cybernetic. You could at least cover in synth skin or something like that.
Yeah.
Or, just some meandering thoughts.
I noticed you included you were writing the script, you included biomancy as do you think that really falls under biotechnology?
Do you consider magic science?
Well, that's
it's
my
hard
question.
to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I guess the way I was conceiving of it was that it's like enhancing the biological form.
Yeah.
Which isn't necessarily... It's genetic engineering.
Right.
Someone is willfully applying some form of
that's true. You can
knowledge
genetically
to manipulate your body. So that's kind of the vein that I was thinking of it in. So maybe biotechnology isn't the right word, but definitely bioengineering.
That's true. Yeah. You can definitely enhance biologically, change DNA structures. Through
and
use
even
of the Force.
even things as simple as enhancing like your ability to resist a poison or a toxin, or I'm sure Jedi can like flood their systems with adrenaline on command or some other chemical compound that makes them more alert or more able to do superhuman feats, right?
Yeah.
And we see them do it pretty routinely. So yeah, I guess I was thinking more genetic or biological manipulation, which there are a myriad of Force techniques that allow you to do. Yeah. And I think we'll kind of delve into those in their own Force techniques episode.
I think, I think that can fit into bioengineering. It's not biotechnology, but it is bioengineering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good question.
I accept.
You accept my answer. All right.
Yeah.
One thing that comes up a lot is this idea of selective breeding and eugenics programs. And it always comes back to the same kind of strata system. Like it always develops into this very hierarchical structure, obviously written with a very negative light. Things like the Arcanians, the Geonosians. It just, these breeding programs turn into like very rigid caste systems, and they just kind of follow the same template with so many different species. Just something I was just going to draw some attention to. To me, when I was writing it, it sounded repetitive. Maybe it's bigger in my head because I was writing it than it came off in the episode, but it is a recurring pattern. The Sith are the biggest example of this, but yeah. And then obviously they go on to purity spirals, and you get like very Nazi connotations tied with it whenever they do that, obviously.
It is like obviously there's huge ethical questions about
eugenics programs.
Or even just like selective breeding, like not necessarily taking people out of the gene pool, but just like stopping their ability.
Yeah. And I mean, some horrifying real world facts on that, like even in Alberta, a very, not many people know about our province. It's not like a world stage.
Alberta, Canada.
Yeah. The fact that we have to qualify it with what country we're in. We had a eugenics program as recently as I believe the 70s or 80s where they were sterilizing people of a certain IQ level.
Yeah.
So like it doesn't necessarily have to be concentration camps and extermination. It can be preventing you from breeding. It can be forced abortion. It can be not letting you have a partner or a mate. Like there's many ways to enforce eugenics.
And I believe that was like I think it deserves mentioning. That was like disproportionately applied to like indigenous people in Canada
and different poor people, different groups, underprivileged groups, and obviously as horrific as that is in and of itself, a lot of people who even that didn't fall into certain IQ levels were sterilized anyways, right?
Well, a lot of people don't like really realize this, but eugenics was very popular at one time in like Western society.
Yeah,
especially in like the 20s, like among academics and stuff. It was like a very,
like in your university classes,
it was like a very open, common belief and like thing that was just like sort of almost accepted as this is what should be the policy going forward. And I think it really was the bad stench of the Holocaust that sort of
put people off
the
of
Nazi regime that like actually turned us against it. Thank God. I think it's just like, but there's still to this day there are people who are sort of like utilitarians and advocate for eugenics, but but not to the extreme. I don't think that. It once was.
So here's another. Sorry, this episode gets pretty dark, but we are talking about
it's for the topic.
Bioengineering and in reality. And so a huge ethical question is the eradication of certain genetic disorders. I believe it was Iceland who was like very proud. Not that long ago, I think it was like as early as 2006, maybe later. They were proud that they eradicated, I believe it was Down syndrome in their population. And that's what the headlines read is like, we've essentially, quote unquote, cured Down syndrome. Well, it turns out the cure was just aborting anyone that had it, right?
Yeah, you can also cure COVID-19 by just
you can cure a lot of diseases,
everybody.
just like communism. You can cure a lot of diseases just by eradicating the population. So
it is it's an effective
but the way
cure.
it was being framed was absolutely horrifying, and so recently too. And then when you actually do some digging, you realize they didn't cure genetic disorders; they just killed the people that had them. So it does raise
aborted them.
Aborted them early on. And there are lots of like Down syndrome rights groups who are absolutely horrified at that, right? Like, who are you to decide they don't have a right to live early on? So
I think me too, as someone who I've had a past career in like working with people with special needs and stuff, and it is kind of horrifying. And I have worked with many people with Down syndrome, and it's like to me it's like I find it deeply offensive that that's like a sort of an option often that's put on the table for people to that they don't deserve a life because of some genetic sort of condition that they're born with, right? Like Down syndrome people can live very full and meaningful lives, but not to get too ideological here, but like it is I can see why a lot of people would have strong feelings about it.
Yeah, absolutely. If nothing else, at least makes you question. Right?
Even if you are like someone who thinks that is okay, I think you like if you're not like asking serious ethical questions about why that is okay, and
at least be self-reflective.
Yeah.
Well, this got very dark very quick. I wasn't expecting that. Anyways, kind of back to Star Wars, I guess.
I do. Sorry, on that topic too. I know, like in nature, like often many different species will just abandon their young if a young has some kind of birth deformity or like
humans were doing it not that long ago.
Exactly. Yeah, it's only because of our wealth that like we really don't do that anymore. We're able to take care of sort of the least among us, if you will.
Yeah. But rigid caste systems.
Yeah.
You can also see kind of real life reflections on that as well. Obviously with a lot of colonial racial quote unquote science often created these kind of like maybe informal caste systems. Obviously you have like a native population of whatever place and then a European power that was dominating it. And then you also have in modern contexts societies that do and have caste systems and very rigid rules around that. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is that like this pattern seems to arise from that kind of ideology.
Yeah.
And that's obviously what the authors are getting at with having these species that go down this route of eugenics and and caste structure. It kind of like pigeonholes individuals, curtails their individual liberties, and forces them into roles, right? Societal roles and functional roles based on whatever the species traits are.
Yeah, caste systems are like super weird too. Even in like say like the British monarchy, like incest was very common, and it, like not being allowed to marry outside of a very small group of people. So it like limited your obvious
breeding
your
potential.
mating choices. So often it wasn't always like direct siblings, but often first or second cousins.
Yeah, and even if you escape the genetic Russian relay.
Yeah, exactly.
You're still adding more bullets every time you do it.
Yeah, that's right.
So eventually it will catch up with you.
Yeah, 100%. But that is sort of like a more longer term, almost bioengineering tactic, because like they're sort of like, often with caste systems, you can actually create almost separate ethnic groups, over a long enough period of time. And like they'll start talking differently. They'll develop different ways of speaking, different dialects, and they'll split off like from the rest of the population they sort of live with. So it is kind of interesting, the whole caste system. And I think it does have a lot to do with like evolutionary biology and stuff. The reasons why people would do them. So
one group in Star Wars that kind of comes out of that I did find kind of strange are the Geonosians. So they do have their caste system is surprisingly not as rigid. Individuals can, I guess, rise above whatever class they were born into. Within certain constraints. So like certain groups can go into other higher groups, maybe not necessarily anyone from any group could transfer between. But the odd thing is that they are a hive species.
Right.
And they breed through queens who essentially give birth to, whatever role you're going to become and whatever traits you have that put you into that role. And in real life, typically species that do have a hive system, like bees or ants or a colony, have a single or a couple of birthing units, queens, and then the rest of the species do fulfill the roles because they're very uniquely, like you'll never find a worker ant become a queen. They're just not biologically capable of ascending, right?
Yeah.
Despite whatever will they may or may not have, which arguably in a hive system, like they don't even have free will, whereas Geonosians do.
Right. But the caste system there is so deeply biological, you can't really even escape it, even if you wanted to.
But they can. Geonosians can.
But I'm saying with like typical hive species.
Yeah. No, and that's what I'm saying. Is the odd thing is that they're a hive species, but individuals can transcend within their society, which is not typical because a worker ant would never become a queen, could never become a drone. Yeah. But with Geonosians, they can. But the odd thing is like selective breeding, and I'm not, a ant colony expert, but how does selective breeding work in a situation where you have one queen giving birth to everyone?
Yeah, I actually don't know how that works. Perhaps it's sort of like, it's like the male-female ratio in humans. Like it's just random, but it kind of comes out roughly even, Yeah. It could be,
you have enough queens and enough
the queens just give birth to random roles. And it kind of, at the end of the day, it kind of hits an equilibrium, But I actually have no idea.
Yeah, and I'm sure no Star Wars author has sat down and really hammered this out.
But I do think the Geonosians, they need maybe to be developed a little more to...
Yeah, and they're a very interesting species because like when you see them on script and when you hear that they're a hive species, you almost think, oh, they're not really individuals. They don't really have free will maybe.
Yeah.
Or at least very limited capacity for free will.
Yeah.
But then it turns out when you read about like certain... Geonosians who've ascended the ranks, and like people like Poggle the Lesser, and they have like titles and
Right.
real names, and they're individuals. You're kind of like, it's kind of strange to see that like dichotomy of hive versus individualism,
Yeah.
and that it both actually exists in this species. Yeah, it was just an interesting thought, and maybe we'll come back to Geonosians and do a whole like deep dive on the species as a whole, and maybe explore that further. Maybe some of our questions are buried in the text, and we'll discover it together.
Indeed.
Yeah. More broadly, huge fan of the Clone Army. I'll bring this up every time I mention them. Very cool super soldier training program. But the true cost of a clone army, I think, is very much understated. Where you essentially raise your army of child soldiers which were shown in the TV shows now, actually, to have more free will than even probably what they were initially conceived to have.
Yeah.
And they're more than just copies of the same person, and they're more than just automatons that are robbed of individual thought and are essentially gang pressed into military service for a republic that does not recognize them as people. They're products being sold.
Yeah.
And so again, probably when we delve into the Grand Army of the Republic episode, we'll mention that again. But clones are my favorite faction. I love everything about them, but I also think there's some really heavy moral questions that I think are totally missed in the text or in the shows.
Yeah.
That would be very cool to see like maybe the Republic was just so far gone that they're willing to do anything to keep themselves together.
Yeah.
And then I become I'm more sympathetic to the Confederacy of Independent Systems, who are just trying to live, we don't want to be part of your corrupt republic anymore. And the Republic is like, no, you have to be.
Yeah.
We'll kill you to make you stay. And we're going to use our slaves to keep your freedoms, right? Like, just the idea of like those opposite ideas being held simultaneously is very interesting. Yeah, I'll never not mention that whenever someone talks to me about clones. Love clone troopers though. Absolutely the coolest faction in Star Wars ever. Just kind of talking about the bioweapons here. Some of it that sounds super sci-fi, like weapons that are key to individual genetic codes, and some of the more horrifying implications of keying it to whole groups of people, is something that is currently being explored by.
Yeah, that's why I was kind of mentioned it earlier a little bit,
Yeah.
but yeah, that go on.
Yeah, it's just, it seems like a technology that seems so science fiction that, someone just made it up like a lightsaber, but it's actually being explored. It's actually being,
researched
and whether like how far along they are, whether or not it's even going to be plausible at the end.
Or do they already have it?
Or do they already have it and they
Yeah.
haven't told anyone?
Yeah.
I lean more towards if they already have it,
Yeah.
they would be using it.
Yeah.
But the fact that they're even doing research into that
Yeah.
is kind of a scary thought. This is like, I think, the nuclear weapons stage of bioweapons, where like, should we be doing this? Is
Right.
this something that, why would you want to exterminate a whole group of people? This is my first question to you.
It's
right?
true.
Of a certain genetic background, right? Like,
You do wonder though, with that kind of research, is there like some positive benefits you can learn from it? Yeah.
I think it could lead towards like eradicating diseases and certain groups of people are prone to, or things like that,
Yeah.
or eliminating genetic disorders without killing the people.
Yeah.
But it's possible. I think. Well, it's the same thing with nuclear energy, right?
Yeah.
Nuclear energy
That's what
is
the
exactly
same
the question.
dichotomy. Yeah.
Yeah, like nuclear energy is the most efficient, the least polluting energy we are capable of doing, which is highly efficient.
Yeah.
And yet it's capable of immense destruction if turned into weapons, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with biotechnology. We can use it to try and cure diseases. We can use it to extend our life, or, do all kinds of crazy things.
Mm-hmm.
But we can also turn it into weapons to wipe out humanity.
Yeah.
And knowing humanity, that seems to be the direction we typically go in.
Yeah. I've also heard, I can't remember where I heard this, but I do remember hearing about like possibly using bioweapons on like certain insect species that can wipe out crops.
So they've even already started doing that. They've released biologically engineered mosquitoes
Oh, okay.
to try and eradicate the
Like
think
malaria? Yeah.
Yeah. Which malaria, incidentally, is a huge killer.
Oh,
I think
yeah,
it is
yeah.
the number one killer of humans, full
Oh,
stop,
right. Okay.
ever in history.
Yeah.
That many people die from malaria. I believe. Don't quote me on that. Maybe it's heart disease or cancer, but it's high up there. It's ridiculously high that people don't realize.
Right.
So that could be the case. The other thing too is I think humans are far from the genetic experts to tamper with these things without fully realizing the consequences of what we might be doing. So even though it's a noble goal,
Yeah.
we may screw things up worse than we realize.
Yeah, it's such when you're dealing with complex systems.
Yeah, like
there's
biology.
so many. I feel like there's so many things that could possibly go wrong. The variables are so impossible to
Calculate.
Calculate and prepare for. So, yeah, it's
To me, even the
it's
benefits.
a dangerous game.
It's a terrifying thought.
Yeah, to me, like nuclear energy is a little more straightforward in terms of like the risks and the benefits.
You can at least see the horizons.
Yeah. Like straight up what the risks are, and straight
And
up
what
what
steps
the
you can do to mitigate them.
but with biologically engineering a species to be sort of less dangerous, we don't know what the ripple effects of that.
Right, exactly. When you release them into the environment, what might happen if another species that preys on them? What happens? Right, all these knock-on effects and domino effects. And
I know one big field of research actually, which a lot of people believe is like very close to having some breakthroughs, is engineering viruses to cure cancer.
Yeah.
And that's like another big field of research. It sounds very promising, but again, what if they're developing a virus that escapes?
It gives you super cancer. It gives everyone super cancer. You contract it just by touching somebody.
Right. Yeah. And if it spreads, if it establishes itself in the population, it could have catastrophic effects.
How do you stop
Like we
that?
have no idea. Yeah. And then when it gets away from a very controlled environment,
I know what you do. Nukes.
Nuclear
weapons are the solution to biological weapons.
We gotta go rat ghoul on them.
Just exterminate.
Just wipe them out. But,
it's a lot of material. Very interesting. The broader implications. Worth exploring, worth looking into. Has potential for great changes for civilization and, hopeful future, but also that dark possibility of like, what's the worst that could happen, right?
Yeah.
And is it worth it? Even crazy enough, as much as cancer sucks, was it worth risking killing everybody?
Right. Yeah. If you accidentally make a virus that is like unbelievably deadly and infectious.
Yeah. And just worse than the thing that you're trying to solve, right?
Yeah.
So, science, does it have limits?
No.
The answer is astoundingly no. Actually, is it Michael Crichton? Writer of Jurassic Park?
Yeah.
People who don't realize this, Jurassic Park is actually very philosophical book. That maybe doesn't. There's elements of it in the movie for sure, and I absolutely love the movie. But there are definitely a lot of questions in that Michael Crichton.
I think it's Crichton.
Crichton?
Yeah.
I've heard it pronounced different ways. That's why I'm trying to like amalgamate them into one. Anyways, the author of Jurassic Park, that he tries to ask his questions and like, exactly that, should science,
right?
Even if science could,
right? Are there avenues of science that you should even explore? Or should we just kind of
put a lid on it,
take it off the table?
And just say, no, we're not willing to do that. Because all you need is something to leak from a lab. Next thing you know, you have a global crisis.
Yeah, it's true.
Anything
could happen. I mean, maybe.
It's definitely in the realm of possibility.
Not like it's happened many times
before.
But anyways, all right, cool. Well, let's
leave it there. Leave you with that question.
And have a shower and wash ourselves.
A decontamination shower, yeah.
All right. Peace.